What would you do if a stranger, stranded and helpless, showed up at your door one rainy evening, someone cold, tired, and out of options, asking for just a little help, nothing more? Would you open your heart? Would you offer your time? That night, in a quiet little town where most people kept to themselves, there lived an elderly mechanic named George. George wasn't famous or wealthy, he wasn't the kind of man people rushed to meet. But he had something rare: kindness. A gentle, quiet kindness that shone in the way he cared for the old cars that came into his small garage, and in the way he treated the few people who crossed his path. George's days were simple and slow. He woke up early, worked with his hands, and spent evenings alone, listening to the soft sounds of rain or the hum of the wind. Loneliness was part of his world, but so was hope, the hope that every broken thing, whether a car or a person, could be fixed with patience and care. Then one stormy night, everything changed. A stranger arrived at George's door, wet, exhausted, and desperate. What happened next was something George never expected. A week later, when he opened his garage, he found a surprise that would turn his quiet life upside down. But before that, let me tell you about George's story, the story of a simple man whose kindness made all the difference. George's days followed a quiet rhythm, much like the gentle ticking of a clock in an empty room. Each morning he woke up just as the sun began to rise, the soft light spilling through his small kitchen window. He'd brew a strong cup of coffee, the aroma filling the little house that smelled faintly of motor oil and old leather. Then, without hurry, he'd make his way to the garage, a place that had been his home away from home for more years than he could count. The garage was more than just a workspace, it was where George felt alive. Among the scattered tools and worn-out car parts, he found purpose. He knew every bolt, every engine like the back of his hand. To George, fixing a broken car wasn't just a job, it was a way of giving new life to something forgotten, a second chance. Life hadn't been easy for him. Years ago he had lost his wife to illness, and since then his children had moved far away, caught up in their own busy lives. Most days the only visitors George had were neighbors dropping by with simple favors or stories. He never complained about the silence, instead he filled it with small acts of kindness. If Mrs. Jenkins down the street needed help carrying groceries, George was there. If old Mr. Harris's lawnmower broke down, George was the first to lend a hand, fixing it without asking for a dime. It was these small moments, smiling quietly over a cup of tea, sharing a laugh with a child, that kept loneliness at bay. Still, despite his gentle heart and quiet generosity, George often felt invisible to the world. People passed by his garage without a glance, unaware of the man who worked tirelessly behind those rusty doors. But George didn't mind. He wasn't looking for attention or praise. All he wanted was to do what he loved, to keep fixing, helping, and maybe, just maybe, making a little difference in the lives around him. Little did he know, his life was about to be touched in a way he never imagined by a stranger who would change everything. It was late that night when George heard a soft, hesitant knock on the garage door. He wasn't expecting anyone, especially at this hour. The rain was falling harder now, drumming steadily on the roof, and the wind whispered through the trees like a secret. George wiped his hands on his worn-out overalls and opened the door, surprised to see a man standing there, soaked from head to toe. The stranger's face was shadowed by the hood of his jacket, but George could see the weariness in his eyes, the kind that comes from a long journey, from being lost and tired. The man's car sat a few feet away, engine silent and smoke rising from under the hood. It was clear the vehicle had broken down, and the man had nowhere else to turn. "Evening," George said gently. "Looks like you're in a bit of trouble." The man nodded, shivering slightly. "Yeah, I didn't expect to be here tonight." George stepped aside. "Come on in. Let's see what we can do." Without hesitation, George grabbed his tools and guided the man under the shelter of the garage. The air smelled of oil and metal, but also safety, a small refuge from the storm outside. As George worked, the man stayed quiet, watching him carefully. Occasionally, They exchanged a few words, nothing too personal, just enough to fill the silence. The stranger's voice was low and calm, almost tired, but there was something about him that felt familiar to George, though he couldn't quite place it. "Long drive?" George asked, tightening a bolt under the car. "Yeah," the man replied softly, trying to get away from a lot of things. George nodded, understanding more than he said. Sometimes everyone needs to run from something, even if just for a little while. Hours passed as George worked patiently, the rain finally easing outside. Every now and then, he offered the man a cup of hot coffee, and the two shared small smiles, simple moments of warmth in the cold night. By dawn, the car was running smoothly again. The stranger looked relieved, almost like a weight had been lifted. "Thank you," he said quietly, standing by the door. George shrugged it off, smiling. "No need to thank me, just glad I could help." The man hesitated for a moment, then reached into his pocket and placed something small and shiny on the workbench. A silver key, unlike any George had seen before. "It's a token," the stranger said, still avoiding George's gaze. "For your kindness." Before George could ask anything else, the man slipped out into the early morning light, leaving behind only the faint smell of rain and a sense of mystery. George watched the car disappear down the road, feeling a strange mix of curiosity and hope. Who was this man? And why did he feel like their meeting was more than just a coincidence? He tucked the silver key into his pocket and closed the garage door, unaware that this night was only the beginning of something extraordinary, something that would soon turn his quiet life completely upside down. Days passed, but George couldn't stop thinking about that strange night. The memory of the man, the tired eyes, the quiet words, and that small silver key left behind, lingered in his mind like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Who was this stranger? Why had he come to George's humble garage in the middle of a storm? And what did that mysterious key mean? George found himself staring at the little token often. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen, smooth and cool in his palm, with tiny engravings that caught the light but made no sense to him. It didn't look like a key to any car or house, more like a symbol, something important but just out of reach. The days went back to their usual quiet rhythm, but something inside George had shifted. His steps were lighter, his smile more frequent. Neighbors noticed it too. Mrs. Jenkins commented one morning how George seemed different, almost like a younger man. "Something good must have happened," she said, with a knowing smile. Even the kids playing down the street stopped to wave more eagerly when they passed by his garage. For the first time in a long while, George felt a flicker of hope, like life had opened a new door just for him, even if he didn't know where it led. But the mystery of the stranger remained. George's mind wandered to countless possibilities. Was the man someone famous hiding from the world, a traveler running from his past, or maybe someone searching for a second chance, just like George had once done? Despite the questions, one thing was clear: the man's visit had left a mark deeper than any repair job George had done. It wasn't just about fixing a broken car, it was about the quiet kindness they had shared. Two strangers crossing paths in a moment of need. One afternoon, as George cleaned up the garage, he found something he hadn't noticed before: a small folded note tucked beneath an old toolbox. It was delicate and worn, with neat handwriting that read only a few words: "Thank you for your kindness. Some things are meant to find us." George held the note carefully, feeling a strange warmth spread through him. The note was unsigned, but it was clear it came from the stranger. A final message, a hint that their meeting wasn't by chance. With the key still in his pocket and the note in his hand, George wondered what the future held. Something big was coming, he could feel it. But for now, the quiet mechanic returned to his workbench, hopeful and ready, waiting for the next chapter of his unexpected story to begin. A week after that rainy night, George woke up feeling the same quiet rhythm of his usual morning. But when he stepped outside and made his way to the garage, something was different. The air felt electric, charged with a kind of energy he hadn't experienced in years. The garage door, usually closed tight and lonely, was open wide. Inside, the space was transformed. Bright lights shone down from the ceiling, new tools gleamed on the walls, and the sound of busy voices filled the air. It was as if his small simple world had suddenly been invited into the spotlight. George stepped inside, blinking in surprise. Then through the crowd of people gathered there, he saw him. The man who had stood quietly at his door that stormy night, the mysterious stranger. Only now, the man wasn't hidden beneath a hood or soaked by rain. He was standing tall, confident and unmistakably famous. It was Johnny Depp. For a moment, George could hardly believe his eyes. The man who had come to his garage in need of help was the same actor whose face was known around the world. Johnny smiled warmly, stepping forward. "George," he said softly, "I wanted to thank you properly." George was speechless. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to find words, but none came. Instead, he simply nodded, his eyes shining with quiet awe. Johnny continued, "I've been traveling for a while, trying to escape the spotlight, to find some peace away from all the noise. When my car broke down, I didn't want to bother anyone or cause a scene. I needed a place where I could just be a person. That's why I came to you." The actor's words were humble, filled with a truth few could imagine. Here was a man, one of the most famous people on the planet, seeking refuge in a small-town mechanic's garage. "But what you gave me," Johnny said, "was more than just fixing a car. You gave me kindness, respect, a moment of real human connection." George's throat tightened. He had never thought his simple act could mean so much. "I want to repay you," Johnny said, "but not with money. I want to offer you a partnership, something that will help your garage grow, bring more people here who need someone like you. A chance to share your kindness with others, on a bigger scale." George shook his head gently, overwhelmed. "I don't need anything like that. I just want to keep doing what I do." Johnny smiled. "And that's exactly why I want to help. People like you, good, honest, kind, deserve to be seen. Let me help you show the world what that looks like." As the two men talked, an unspoken bond formed between them. It was not about fame or fortune, but about respect and gratitude. Two very different lives, connected by a simple act of kindness on a rainy night. Word soon spread. News cameras arrived, reporters asking questions, but George remained humble, refusing the spotlight. He continued working in his garage, the same way he always had, only now with a renewed sense of purpose. And every time he glanced at that silver key Johnny had left behind, George remembered how a simple night, a helping hand, and an unexpected visitor had changed everything. After that unforgettable morning, George's life slowly began to change, but not in the way most people might expect. The surprise visit from Johnny Depp brought attention. Yes, but it didn't change who George was. The quiet mechanic with a gentle heart remained the same humble man, still rising early each day, still working with the same care and dedication in his little garage. What did change was the world around him. Word spread through the town, and beyond about the elderly mechanic, who helped a famous stranger in need, and who in return, was offered a chance to grow his business and his life. People started visiting the garage, not just for repairs, but to meet the man behind the story. Friends and neighbors, new and old, gathered around George with smiles and respect. Opportunities came knocking. Johnny kept his promise, helping George modernize the garage, bringing in better equipment, and connecting him with others who shared George's love for simple, honest work. George even found himself mentoring young apprentices, sharing the skills and kindness that had been his guiding light for so many years. But through it all, George stayed grounded. He never let the fame or the new attention change his heart. He still greeted every visitor with the same warm smile, listened patiently to every story, and treated every car as if it was the most important one in the world. Kindness, George often said, is the simplest thing we can offer, but it can change the hardest lives. And his own life was proof. That quiet night when he opened his garage to a stranger in need wasn't just a moment of fixing a broken car. It was the moment when two lives crossed paths and changed each other forever. George learned that no act of kindness is ever wasted, and sometimes, The smallest gestures can ripple out in ways we never expect. Now, whenever George looks at the silver key Johnny left behind, he sees more than a mysterious token. He sees a symbol of hope, connection, and the beauty of human kindness. In a world that often feels fast and uncaring, George's story reminds us all to slow down, open our hearts, and help others, because you never know when that simple act might change your life, or theirs, in ways beyond imagination. Stories like George's remind us how powerful small acts of kindness can be. Sometimes, all it takes is opening a door, offering a hand, or simply being there for someone in need. These moments may seem small, but they can change lives in ways we never imagine. If you enjoyed this story, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming tales, and share it with friends who believe in the power of kindness. We'd also love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced or witnessed an unexpected act of kindness that changed your day or even your life? Share your story in the comments below. Your experiences could inspire others just like George's story inspired us. Thank you for watching, and remember, kindness always finds a way.